Good morning. Welcome to Grace and Faith Portugal. I am Renette and today I'm going to continue with Women of the Bible. We have started with Sarah and then we jumped to Hannah. And today we're going to go back to Hagar and we will mention Sarah again. These two women are very interesting and they really intrigue me, and that's why I keep going back to them. There is so much we can learn from them. Now, when we look at Hagar, her name means resident or alien. Hay for the and Gar means the resident or alien. So let's continue and see what is her story all about. Well, let's just start with Sarah again. We know that Sarah did not have a baby as was promised, and she was waiting and waiting and waiting. And we can have a little bit of sympathy with her because from the time that they received the promise from God, and she was then probably already a mature lady, was another 26 years. So can we feel a little bit sympathy that maybe she was starting to run out of trust, thinking that it's never going to happen, waiting for so long, crying out for a baby, and nothing happens. I can imagine what she was going through. Now let's look at where Hagar fits into the story. When Abraham and Sarah, at this stage Sarai, arrives in Egypt because of the famine, and she ended up in the palace of Pharaoh. I think this was the time that Hagar was given to her as a slave or as a servant, or as the Bible called her, her handmaiden. We don't know where she comes from, but if she was in the palace and if that is true, then maybe she could have been one of Pharaoh's daughters. Now, as a handmaiden, she would have had quite a nice life in the palace, looking after Sarah and also having all the other Egyptian girls with her, being near her family and having all the other benefits that goes with it. But when Pharaoh's family was hit by the plague and he was not a happy man, he wanted to get rid of these Hebrews, and all of them, including all their slaves, whatever was part of them, anybody that was associated with them, was kicked out of Egypt and banished immediately. And this is where poor Hagar fell into the same situation, because she was part of this group of slaves that now had to leave. So let's look at it. What was her position before? Living in a palace, being with her family. Now she's cast out. She now has to live with a group of people that has a different language as her. They have a different culture. They have a different God. She's got Egyptian gods. It couldn't have been easy for Hagar to leave everything behind that she was used to, what she knew, to go into the unknown world, and that now as a slave. What would happen to her? She must have had some dreams. She must have had some hopes for the future. She must have been, as we can imagine, a young, strong virgin, working hard for Sarah. She may have been in love with a nice, handsome Egyptian boy. All that is now gone. All those dreams. She's now going into a future that she has no idea. Now, a slave has no rights. A slave has no belongings. A slave has not say how he wants to or not want to be treated. A slave have to keep to the rules, keep their head down and work and do whatever the master tells them to do. And often they're not treated very well either, because they just something that belongs to them. People look down to a slave. A slave have no image. A slave has nothing. He is just a purse, just a convenience. And no say, can't run away and nowhere to complain about his treatment. When we look at the word enslaved, it is the same word in Hebrew that was used when the Israelites years later after this, probably about 400 years after the story of Abram, were enslaved in Egypt by Pharaoh. And they again had no rights. They were enslaved. They had to do what they were told. So Sarai at this stage still don't have a child. And now she decides to take matters in her own hand, and she decides to help God. We see now that she's going to use Hagar as a surrogate. In Genesis 16 verse 2, Sarai told Abram, "The Lord has not allowed me to have children, so sleep with my slave. Maybe she can have a son, and I will accept him as my own." Abram did what Sarai said. Sounds a bit like Adam, doesn't it? He did what Eve told him to do. She says here that Lord has not allowed me to have children. Now, you would think, well, if the Lord did not allow you to have children, Sarai, why do you think you now have the right to take matters in your own hand? Well, she knew God made the promise. If he's not going to keep his promise, well, she thinks maybe it's up to her to make it happen, which we said last week is not true. But let's go on. So we also see here now, Sarah really treats Hagar like a slave. She doesn't call her on her name. She calls her Hagar, which we now know means resident. We don't even know if she knows Hagar's real name. And now poor Hagar is innocent. It's not as if she has tried to seduce Abraham or tried to go bypass Sarah. She's innocent. She's just told, there, go. You have to be with Abraham tonight. That is not a nice situation for her to be in. And how devastating it must be. And obviously Abraham was so much older than her. I don't think this is at all what Hagar wanted. But she had no choice. Nobody asked her what she thought about it. And she had to do it. The only good thing in this part of it is in verse 3, chapter 16, verse 3. So after living 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai gave her Egyptian slave to Abram as a second wife. So Abram did marry her. She wasn't just a concubine. And in verse 4, Abram slept with Hagar and she became pregnant. When Hagar realized this, she became very proud and began to feel that she was better than Sarai, her owner. Well, at least, Abram married her, and Hagar now thought that her position is going to change in this household. After all, she's now wife number 2. And she became a little bit proud. But this did not go down very well with Sarah, because we see Sarah still saw her as a slave girl. She did not acknowledge her as a second wife, even though at the time she thought it was a good idea for her to sleep with her husband. And I would imagine Hagar thought that, well, maybe she won't be a slave anymore. She will get somebody else now to be her slave. No, that did not happen. Abraham didn't really accept her as a second wife, and neither did Sarah. And Sarah looked down at her now with contempt. So Sarah ran to Abraham, and we read in verse 5, Then Sarai said to Abraham, My slave girl now hates me, and I blame you for this. Isn't that how things work in our life? That the minute things don't work out the way we plan it, and when we plan it, it seldom does work out, that we now blame the other person. Now, in all fairness, this was not Abraham's idea. He didn't say no, but it was Sarah's idea, and now she blames him. And she said, I gave her to you. She did say, I gave it to you. And you became pregnant. And she became pregnant. Then she began to feel that she's better than I am. I want the Lord to judge which of us is right. We mess up, and then we run to the Lord. And of course, we want God to take our side in this situation. And then in verse 6, Abram said to Sarai, She's your slave. You can do anything you want to her. So Sarai was cruel to Hagar, and Hagar ran away. Can you blame Hagar? No, you can't. She's already not being happy to be in the situation of being a second wife. Things didn't improve for her, and now she's still being treated very badly. So she runs away. So this is sad for her. And I would imagine that she would have liked Abraham to step up and come up for her. But he didn't. He said to Sarai, she's yours, you deal with her. I don't want to know anything about it. So Abraham didn't. He just didn't care. I'm sure we can say that Hagar must have felt so unloved. Nobody cares about her. How lonely must that have been, away from her family, away from her country, in a foreign country, being treated like this. And she flees into the wilderness. And wilderness here is sometimes where we end up when we're not in a happy place and we run away. She's not the last one to suffer under sin. Abraham did her a great wrong. And Sarah's impatience not to wait for when it was God's timing to give her that baby, which he would have, really messed up Hagar's life. You know, sometimes we feel that we're in this wilderness, and instead of running towards God, what do? We run away from Him. We don't run towards Him. We run away. We turn our back to Him. We want to try and sort things out. And we end up alone in a desert. And what is the wilderness in this case? Drought, no water, nothing. And she actually knows that she may face death. The place where she was running to and where she was found, where God comes to her, we'll see later on, make us believe that she was trying to run back to Egypt. Where else was she going to go? She's all on her own. But, you know, when we face all this loneliness and we're in our wilderness, there's only one person who can help us, and that is God. His grace is sufficient for us. I like what we read in 2 Kings 20 verse 5. Go back and speak to Hezekiah, the leader of my people. Tell him, this is what the Lord, the God of your ancestor David says. I heard your prayer and I saw your tears, so I will heal you. If any of you is in that wilderness, these words are for you. God heard you. He sees your tears, and He heard your prayers, and He will heal you. So, what does Hagar find? In verse 7 of Genesis 16, the angel of the Lord found Hagar. I lost my place. And the angel found Hagar near a spring of water in the desert. The spring was by the road of Shur. So the Lord found Hagar near the spring of water. So wherever you are, the Lord will find you. And in verse 8, and he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence comest thou, and whither wilt thou, where are you going? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress, Sarai. God knows where she is, but he still asks her, where are you? Where are you going? And she said, I'm running away. And the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself to her hands. And the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, and it shall not be numbered for multitude. So, first of all, I think that this angel is Jesus. It is one of the godlies because it said, I will, and the only one who's able to do that is God, the deity. And he told her to go back. Why? Do you think she wanted to go back? I don't think she wanted to go back. This is not what she wanted to hear. She wanted to hear, here I am, I'm going to help you to get to Egypt much quicker. No, she is told by the angel, go back, return to your mistress. And what's worse, submit to her. She's your boss. You're not going to go back and have it any better, but you have to go back. So she has no choice. So I do believe that this is the Lord God, this is Jesus, because that's his nature to come and help when we're in a predicament. So the spring of water where she is an oasis. And what is an oasis in a desert? That is a place where there's water, where there is life, where you think this is the end, and suddenly there is that spring of water, that life. She must have been at least 10 years now with Abraham and Sarai, so she now knows God. She was part of this family, and we can see that she must have faith, which is good, that she's not part of the Egyptian gods and all those beliefs, that she actually has learned about God. And isn't it amazing that God comes to her and with this spring of water? Because we remember the Samaritan woman in the New Testament in John 4 verse 13, where Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but anyone who drinks the water I give will never be thirsty again. The water I give people will be like a spring flowing inside them. It will bring them eternal life." So Hagar doesn't know this, but at this stage, God comes to her rescue and he tells her to go back. Maybe because he doesn't want her to go to Egypt, because she will just fall back into praying and worshipping the false gods in Egypt. Maybe because he still wants to help her, even though Sarah and Abraham got her into this predicament. He sees her as not a slave, but is of someone who's got value. Because the angel said to her, Hagar, he gave her that name. He didn't just call her slave, what are you doing here? He called her Hagar. He saw more in her than what actually Sarai saw in her. Another reason I think that the angel said to her to go back and to submit is also that she had to check her pride, because remember, until after she got married to Abraham, she became prideful towards Sarai, and she didn't submit to Sarai anymore. She thought her position was going to change. So the angel had to say to her, submit, get off your high chair, don't be so prideful, and then humble her. So he may have rebuked her a little bit, say, your place is in the tent of Sarah, that is your destiny. But he does acknowledge her for who she is and by her name, and not as a slave. So in verse 9, he said of chapter 16, the angel of the Lord said to her, Sarai, your owner, go home to her and obey her. That's it. You know, sometimes when we are in different situations, the Lord's not going to take that situation away. He's not going to make it easier. He's going to say to you, go back, go through it, carry that cross through it. But whatever you need to get through it, I will give you. I'll be with you. You're not alone. So she had to realize who she was and that she was better off in Sarah's tent. And there she will be provided for. She would be protected. A child will be born and she would be not alone. And so she went back to Sarai. In 1 Peter 3 verse 12 we read, for the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Doesn't matter where you are, the God is always there. He looks out for the righteous. He will find you where you are. And then in verse 10, the angel said to her, from you will come many people, too many to count. So Hagar gets a promise, just like Abraham, that God has not forgotten her. He has a plan. Even this child was not his idea. Even this marriage was not his idea. He will help Hagar. And even though she's a slave, her son will multiply and there will be many of them. So we sometimes look at ourselves like the world look at us, instead of looking how God look at us. He sees something precious in us. He sees value in us. the way the world value us is in different standards than how God value us. And we can be so grateful for that, because what the world thinks is of value is not to value of God. God sees you as precious, and He loves you more than anything else in this world. And in verse 11, the angel said to her, Hagar, you are pregnant and you will have a son. You will name him Ishmael, because the Lord has heard what you were treated badly. So even if your situation looks like there's no hope, God will make a way. He will open doors. There's always hope. Your prayers will be answered. You must just submit to Him. And in verse 11, the angel of the Lord said to her, Behold, you are pregnant and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your afflictions. So Ishmael was not God's doing, but still He has a plan for Ishmael. Before Ishmael is even born, God has a plan for him, which is the same for us. Before we were even born, God has a plan for all of us. And in verse 12, Ishmael will be wild and free like a wild donkey. He will be against everyone, and everyone will be against him. He will move from place to place and camp near his brothers. So there he will be free. That's a promise that God made to Hagar. And that is something now that she can have and cherish as she goes forward, returning to Sarah. And in verse 13, the Lord talked to Hagar. She began to use new name of God for God. She said to him, You are God who sees me. She said this because she thought, I see that even in this place, God sees me and cares for me. If you think you're alone and nobody loves you, nobody cares, then write down verse 13 somewhere where she said, God sees me. He knows who I am. He cares for me. And this is encouraging for us, because sometimes we just think nobody sees us, nobody cares. And don't forget, Hagar is still in the old covenant. She's not got into the new covenant. And she's an Egyptian. She's not even part of the Hebrew community. She's really an outcast. She's an alien. And yet, God looks out for her. He sees who she is. And she realizes that it is God who is talking to her. And she is so amazed that she's still alive because of His glory. But He meets her where she is. And in that moment, there's such an intimate relationship between her and God, that intimate moment, and that she names Him God. And it's one of the few places where God is given a name, and she's called Him El Roi, submitting to the God and leading to His blessing. So in 2 Chronicles 16 verse 9, For the eyes of the Lord run to and from throughout the whole earth, to give strong support to those whose heart is blameless towards Him. You have done foolish in this, for from now on you will have wars. So if you keep your eyes on the Lord, you will have, and you are blameless. He will be there for you, and submitting to Him will lead to blessings. So she called the place Beer-lahai-roi. It is between Kadesh and Baret, where this encounter is with God. And Hagar gave birth to Abram's son, and Abram named him Ishmael. By now, Abram is 86 years old when Ishmael was born. But things did not get any better between Sarah and Hagar. And we read in verse 10 that Sarah said to Abram, Get rid of that slave woman and her son. Send them away. When we die, our son Isaac will get everything we have. I don't want that slave woman's son sharing these things with my son. Verse 11. This upset Abram very much, and he was worried about his son Ishmael. But God said to Abraham, "Don't worry about the boy and the slave woman. Do what Sarah wants. Your descendants will be those who come through Isaac. But I will also bless your son of the slave woman. He is your son, so I will make a great nation of his family too." So the next morning, Abraham sends them away with some food and water, which didn't last very long, and they wandered in the desert near Beersheba. So things did not go very well for Hagar, even though she returned. There was no way Sarah at this stage now, was going to give her any space, any time. She wanted to get rid of her. So they walked a short distance away and sat down, and she thought her son would die because there was no water. She did not want to watch him die, so she sat and began to cry. And God heard the boy crying, and God's angel called to Hagar from heaven, and he said, "What is wrong, Hagar? Don't be afraid. God has heard the cry." So again, God finds Hagar when she is in the desert. Again, he comes to her and said, "Don't be afraid." God allowed Hagar to see water. If he allowed her to see it, it means it was always there. You know, the provision is always there for you and me. We just don't always see it. And sometimes we need God to say, "Open your eyes, it's there." And he allows us to see it. That's what he does. He comes to redeem Hagar again at this point and now sets them free. So the sin and the corruption put us under bondage. But it keeps us in chains, like it did here with her. And we can stay in this state of slavery. And it just leads to death. We need to get out of it. And the only way we can do it is through the shedding of the blood of Christ that redeemed us. We can't do it ourselves. Sarai tried to do things herself. Hagar running away. But even running away, she just ended up in another position of death. With Sarai, she wasn't treated very well. Now she's going to die of thirst. But when God comes and gives provision, it's forever. Jesus came as a human to us so that we could relate to him. He had to come as a human because we're the ones who messed up through Adam. So it was a human that had to save us. But the only human who could save us was one that was without sin. And who was that? Who could fulfill that? Only Jesus could. So God can use any crisis that is caused by our doing and by our evil to show us the power that God has and the love for us. And we see right through this story God's love and his power, how he did keep to his word even when Hagar ran away, even when Sarah tried to do things her way. And we see in verse 13 again that whenever we drink from the water of Christ, we will not thirst again. Don't always look with your physical eyes in what is the situation or where you are. You've got to look with your spiritual eyes. Because with your physical eyes, you will just give up hope. You will not see the water well. You will just see the wilderness. You will see death. So in verse 20, God continued to be with the boy while he grew up. Ishmael lived in the desert and became a hunter. He learned to shoot a bow very well. And his mother found a wife for him in Egypt, and they continued to live in the Paran desert. So this in a nutshell is the story of Hagar. Now next week I want us to look at a deeper meaning of how we can look at the story of Hagar and of Sarah. There's so much more deeper into the story. Till now we just see how Hagar's life was leaving Egypt, living with Sarah, being treated badly, ended up being the second wife of Abraham, have no benefits, still be treated badly, and at the end being kicked out. But then how God came up for them and looked after her and Ishmael, and that Ishmael would have a multitude of generations after him. Thank you for watching. Please share this with your friends and family. And please follow us on YouTube and on Facebook. and on Rumble. Please pray with me. Dear Lord, how can we sometimes just mess up just because we do not want to wait patiently for what you have for us? But we saw here with Hagar that you don't see us like the world sees us, as a slave of no value, but that you see us as something precious. And even if we mess up ourselves, you will bring a way out, and it will be good. And Hagar ended up being free and living with her son and probably with his family. Lord, we keep our eyes on you. We don't want to run away from our problems, but to run towards you, like we learned Hannah did, and trust you and your precious timing. Amen. Thank you and goodbye.